Good afternoon. It's Friday the 2nd of September 2016, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Mike Robinson, and I'm joined today via Skype by David Scott from Northern Exposure. Welcome to the programme, David.
Good to be here, Mike.
Okay, well, let's get straight on with it, because, we've got Nippy apparently meeting. Who's this she's meeting? Obviously a German of some kind, but who is she meeting?
But this is the ambassador, I believe, and the issue here, which has been raised, is the flags in the background. You'll see there's a Saltire representing Scotland, which all seems appropriate, and that would be the flag of the Weimar Republic representing Germany, which also appears to be the official flag. But this, it transpires, is not universally the way this is done.
Right. Well, that's a bit strange because it seems to be the way it's done when Theresa May visits.
Well, the key here is that when Theresa May visits, there is, in fact, two Saltires, and there is no Union flag. The Union flag seems to have been consigned to the outer reaches. It's not right. Allowed in Butte House, it would seem. So
can we put this one up, please, Theo? And so the question is, who is worse, Nippy or Theresa? In this case, now the Express, when they were covering this, said, when approached by express.co.uk, a Scottish government spokeswoman said, it is as a normal procedure for a UK intergovernmental meeting of this nature, the configuration of the venue was discussed and agreed with colleagues from Number 10 during an advance visit. So who's worse here?
Well, we don't know what's really been happening, because was it in fact that we didn't want, or Theresa didn't want to see the Union flag there in case you looked like a visiting embassy official. We don't really know, but it's certainly gone down badly with some sections in Scotland that the Union flag was apparently excluded. I also have here that there's been more Union flag news in Scotland. We've got SNP MSP Christine Graham. Now she was she's head of the Justice Select Committee, and that was the team I wrote to, asking them to go and see Robert Greene when he was incarcerated in HMP Perth for reporting the truth about the cover-up of paedophilia in Scotland. And of course, she and her committee refused to go, refused to interview Robert Greene, refused to be involved in any way. So not looking at important things like that. She has found the time, however, to complain to Tesco about them removing the Saltire from Scottish strawberries and putting the Union flag on instead, which apparently improves sales in England. So there you go. We are looking at the big issues here in Scotland.
Well, indeed, and here's another big issue then, because Jeremy Corbyn, of course, no better. His sidekick, Steve Rotherham, who's standing to become the elected mayor of Liverpool, has promised to create a new flag, according to this article in the Echo. Oh, it's another article in the Echo. If he's elected to become the Metro Mayor. So he has been selected to be the Labour candidate for that election. And he has backed the idea after the Echo, in this article that I'm showing, highlighted that Merseyside had a flag, and that flag had been created in the 1970s for the old Merseyside County Council. So they're perhaps going to bring this flag back for the new city region. And Steve Rotherham said, I wouldn't rule out bringing back the Merseyside flag. However, I do feel it needs modernising and bringing into the 21st century. So city regions, absolutely part of the devolution plan. It's not just Scotland and Theresa May that are trying to break up the union at the moment. And let's not forget where this agenda is coming from, because, of course, more millions of pounds, £84 million in this case, coming from Europe to back city region projects. Well, we've mentioned this quite a number of times before. The Global Paliament of Mayors are about to have their inaugural session next week. Well, thankfully, in time for that, they have produced their new logo, which you said looked like a thumbprint, David.
I thought that was a fingerprint, and maybe that's an indication as to what they have in store for us all, Mike.
But the key point here, the the key point we're trying to make, I think, is that what we're witnessing really is the breakup of the United Kingdom.
Well, yes, we have here a strange subdivision of power, where rather than the power returning actually to the people, to the individual, and remember the country was built on people having individual control over their lives to an extremely high degree, and choosing to voluntarily cooperate with one another where that was necessary. So we're having the rhetoric of this, the rhetoric of devolving power back down to the people. But in fact, the practice is quite the reverse. The practice is that power is being gathered always towards the centre, and that centre becomes ever more remote from the ordinary man and woman in Britain.
And that is indeed the point that we're trying to make with regard to these city regions and mayors in particular, and the Global Parliament of Mayors, because this is a form of global governance that we haven't seen so far. This is pretty new. Now, of course, what's driving all this? It is global leadership and leadership programs, and of course, this comes back to the common purpose with a small c and a small p. So I want to highlight here yet another influential network of 46,000 alumni in this case, another leadership program, if you want to call it that, in this case government sponsored, and this is Chevening. So why am I doing this? Well, it's because the British High Commissioner to Sierra Leone, Guy Warrington, has just had the pleasure of hosting a farewell reception for a bunch of Sierra Leonean youth who have been in the UK having their minds reframed. They've been at university, but I'm sure they've been doing other things as well. Now, Chevening itself, let's just note, is pretty close to Common Purpose, so they are working with Common Purpose, in this case to bring 100 young leaders to Glasgow for the 3360 leadership program, which is a Common Purpose program. But about the Sierra Leone visit, Guy Warrington had this to say: every year the Chevening program selects the very best candidates to study in the UK, so I'm delighted to say farewell to the 8 successful Chevening scholars, all of whom have demonstrated their potential and readiness to be future leaders and influencers in their respective fields. So this is truly a global leadership program through multiple channels. Common Purpose is one channel, Chevening is another, CSC Leaders another. There are a host of these leadership programs running all at the same time. And it's hardly surprising that we start to see the same types of policy agendas appearing in really everywhere around the planet.
So this would be a Rhodes Scholarship type approach, the Milner Group, and influencing policy by changing the way that future leaders think, but applied now to Africa as well as to Great Britain, United States, and the Commonwealth.
That's absolutely right, and Asia as well, because Common Purpose absolutely working very hard in Southeast Asia at the moment.
But they love Asia, yes.
Absolutely, but it's not just the actual leadership training itself that's the important part. It's the networks that are being built under the auspices of leadership training. So these alumni programs, and of course, all you have to do is all you have to do is pick up the phone to your fellow alumni if you need some help.
Yes, so there's informal networks. Now, we've obviously had this before with the Milner Group, and that was a large part of how we stumbled into the First World War as a nation, and in fact as a continent. Secret behind the deals, behind the scenes deals, secret arrangements, and secret channels of communication do not make for transparent government, Mike.
No, indeed. Okay, well, let's move on to Scottish news. British Transport Police, according to the BBC here in Scotland, are be given tasers. They're going to start carrying tasers in a bid, they say, to increase security on the network. The British Transport Police have said that this is a proportionate response in the face of a mounting terrorism threat. David, clearly Scotland has a major terrorism problem.
Well, this is the question. I mean, the mounting terrorism threat, where? The mounting terrorism threat is, I understand as a piece of rhetoric, I understand as an excuse to make us all less free. and understand as a reason to have more and more armed police roaming around the country. I understand what the state gets from it. What I don't see is any actual threat. There is no terrorism threat. You go on a Calmac ferry in Scotland now, and there's an announcement about abandoned bags and things. These are not targets. These are not threats. There is no threat. There is no terrorism. But there are plenty of arms being added to our police, and our wise overlords are taking ever greater personal precautions. But there's no threat. So what we've got here is not a threat, but rather a narrative.
Well, I mean, I'm sorry, David, I have to disagree with you, because this story here is telling me that councillors in East Lothian are believed to be the first in Scotland to be equipped with satellite-tracked panic buttons following the death of Joe Cox.
Yes, well, East Lothian seems to be somehow the centre of the New World Order, as far as I can tell, because this is the same team that brought you guidance as to how to spy, how to get local authority officials to spy on the residents using Facebook and social media and such like. So there seems to be a lot of things going on in East Lothian. I particularly enjoyed this one, though. You'll appreciate this. Councillor Stuart Curry, leader of the council's SNP opposition, said the move was important for, quote, peace of mind. He said, I hold my surgeries in a busy place, but others are in rural locations, often on their own. We would not expect council staff to go on their own to meetings, and it was right that we take the same preventative measures for councillors. So can you imagine the horror, can you imagine the terror, Mike, of having to go to a meeting on your own?
Well, indeed. And I mean, so where's this taking us, David? Is it getting to the point where we are going to, if we want to have any interaction with an MP or a councillor, we're going to have to enter a room, which would be have an armed guard standing there, perhaps?
Well, it's sending certain messages, isn't it? It's certainly sending a message to the councillors. Don't trust the people. The people are the threat. It's us and them. It's bunker mentality, isn't it? I mean, it is really bunker mentality writ large. And it's sending a message to the people that you are dangerous, we do not trust you. It's a very, very strange situation. We managed to get by quite happily in this country for 1,000 years without this degree of security separating our elected representatives from the ordinary man and woman in the street. I don't see any reason at all why this should be introduced now.
But just a final point on this then. This seems to reflect a major constitutional change because, of course, behind this is the presumption of guilt.
Yes, you are increasingly guilty until proven innocent. And increasingly, ordinary lawful actions are being criminalised and ordinary lawful people are being criminalised because that's a weapon of control. We see that what we're getting is not law and order, although we're paying very heavily for the privilege. We're getting less and less law and order, less and less justice for more and more money. And the cash and the resources are being used instead to oppress us, not to protect us.
Okay, well, let's move on to the next item, which is the Scottish child abuse inquiry, which seems to be having about as much success as the English one. This is the latest development, which is the child abuse survivors quitting the inquiry. So a group of child abuse survivors are to have their case heard by the English inquiry into the issue amid claims they face no prospect of justice in Scotland.
I would have to say, disastrous though the English child sexual abuse inquiry is, it is a paragon of well-run efficiency compared to the Scottish one. The Scottish one is simply hideous. We've had 2 of the 3 leading people resign, citing Scottish government interference. We've had no explanation or means of addressing this from the Scottish government. And now we've had one of the survivor groups again, and this is becoming a pattern. What happens in Scotland if you find yourself unable to get justice? You have to flee to England. So we're 9 years or something into an SNP administration, and increasingly we're seeing a flow south looking for justice. That is not a good sign, Mike, not a good sign at all. We had to go to London with the No to Name Person campaign because the Scottish courts could not spot blatant fascism when it was staring them in the face. They could not spot the overarching overreach of the state involving themselves in the minutiae of family life for every family in Scotland. They gave it a pass in the Scottish courts. It had to go down to the Supreme Court in London to get anything approaching justice. And here we see this again. We see survivors of child sexual abuse having campaigned for years to get an inquiry in Scotland, only to find that inquiry is so compromised, is such a shambles, is so influenced by government and other conflicted views that they're having to quit and go to England to try and get some justice. It's a sad day for Scottish justice.
Well, this is an interesting point because I think this morning YouGov released the results of a poll suggesting that, saying basically that there is no desire whatsoever for second referendum on Scottish independence. Is that then a reflection of a recognition within the Scottish population that independence would actually result in something pretty negative to their well-being?
Yes, I think that's exactly what's been picked up by the Scottish population, and increasingly so. This is, you may have missed it, but this is the first day of the SNP's Summer of Love campaign to persuade us all to vote for independence in a year or two. Now, this has been trailed as an appeal to no voters to persuade them and to listen to their concerns, blah, blah, blah. You also note that it's a little bit late as a Summer of Love because we're now entering the autumn, but that's because there's been a whole series of catastrophic embarrassments for the SNP all through the summer, so they couldn't actually launch this campaign before now. But the deeper point, you're quite right, is that flawed though the British system is, terribly flawed and getting worse though the Westminster system is, what has been offered by Holyrood, what has been offered by a unitary Scottish state is in fact far worse. We see less and less protection for the individual. We see property rights being trampled. We see individual rights being trampled, and not just in the named person. We see corruption and cronyism as the state assembles into one superorganism, and we see no questions being answered, no economic literacy in sight. We see major problems. So the people of Scotland do not want this, because the people promoting Scottish independence are no longer able to face real problems, answer real questions, and conduct themselves with openness and honesty. And we know what we'll get if these people are in charge.
Well, I would just say to end that of course Scotland is the pilot for devolution, and devolution to city regions and unitary authorities throughout Britain. We're going to get the same governance model in the rest of Britain. But let's move on up and discuss in a bit more detail some Scottish justice. The judge is judged here, David. This is an interesting little story because this judge basically, what was he doing?
Well, it was strangely light-hearted because he was putting a young man who's undoubtedly a thug and a menace behind bars for 9 months. Initially, he gave him a community work scheme as a punishment, and the man was unwise enough to publicly ridicule this judgment on social media and declare that he would not actually comply. He was then given a second punishment of more free work in the community, and he ridiculed that as well, and then this judge sent him down for 9 months. But in sentencing him, which is a serious matter, the judge used words like, don't think this is done in anger, you have brightened up an otherwise dull day, and as they say now, LOL. So this seems to show a very questionable approach from a judge, a temporary judge in this case, an issue that has been a matter of some concern in the Scottish judicial system for some years. It used to be a matter of concern to Nicola Sturgeon when she was in opposition. It is not anymore. So I would encourage people to seek out that. They're always excellent Scottish Review and have a look at what the implications are there. It does suggest that the justice system in this country, it's another bit of evidence that the justice system in this country is not at all healthy.
And the Sheku Bayo case absolutely highlights that, continues to highlight that. Yes,
Sheku Bayo, we still do not have a report on the cause of death.
Now, just for people that aren't familiar or don't remember, just give us a brief rundown of what happened here.
Yeah, Sheku Bayo was killed in questionable circumstances by the police in Kirkcaldy in Fife. He's a family man. He was returning home. He may have had some substance. He may have been behaving a little bit erratically, but he was killed in custody, and there were something like 7 stories coming from the police in the first 5 hours. The story kept changing. He was accused of all sorts of violence, none of which seems to be true, and in fact he was also described as being a huge and massively powerful man, which is not true. But he was, when he died, sat on by a 24-stone policeman, amongst others. So there's a huge question over what happened to this man, and there seems to be only delay, cover-up, and obfuscation by Police Scotland. There is no clarity here at all, and we're still waiting on an official cause of death. It must be well over a year now later. It's ridiculous.
Yes, and okay, what about Liam Fee then? Bring us up to date with this.
Now, this is a terribly sad story of a toddler who died in Fife, but what's coming out of the inquiry is that the social services, the social worker and the social work department involved were completely unfit for purpose. That you had a social work department in essentially open war against itself, with cliques and splits and divisions, and a social worker grossly neglecting her duty, is what it would seem. Now, tragedies like this are the sort of thing that are constantly run out by the Scottish government and Scottish Government ministers as an excuse for the named person scheme and the state surveillance of every family. But what we see time and time again is when these tragedies occur, it's not because the vulnerable child wasn't known to social services, it's not because they some way fell through the net, it's because of gross failure on the part of those charged with the safety of that child to do their job.
Indeed. Now we've been discussing Scottish justice. Let's move on to Irish justice, which will lead us into the Docherty case. Now you wanted to highlight Integrity Ireland, which seems like a pretty interesting organisation, and they have been highlighting some of the issues with Irish justice. So let's just run a few of them. Run through a few of them. Summonses being issued 4 months past the statutory time limits. Summonses being hand-delivered by Gardaí, which is the Irish police, to a home address, intimidating, basically. Gardaí falsely claiming that other summonses had been sent by registered post, and this person having been convicted and fined in his absence on one such substance. He lodged a circuit court appeal, which he won. Because the Garda would not produce any records or proofs, and so it goes on. The first court hearing was adjourned after 5 months instead of being automatically struck out when the prosecuting Garda did not show up. Corruption of an incredible level within the Irish justice system.
Yes, and the towns involved, Castlebar, County Mayo, and related areas. So if you followed the Docherty story, you'll see some of the same names, same town names, same individual names are cropping up here. It's very encouraging to see this organisation in Ireland fighting back, because this is an outline of a court case that they are taking out in the Irish courts against the organisations and individuals who have been subverting the rule of law in Ireland. So we wish them every success in their ongoing fight for justice.
Now, in the investigation into the Dochertys, it seems like you've come across a case, the Manning case. And if we just bring this one up, on the right-hand side there is a document where certain issues are listed. For example, failure, neglect, and/or breach of statutory duty, denial of due service, failure to uphold the law and the Constitution, abuse of authority, misuse of statutory instruments and facilities, and so on it goes. And this is quite a long document, but within that document, a name appears, and that name is Mary Malee. And within the document, the text says, on the same day, January the 23rd, at the urgent meeting scheduled by Ms. Mary Malee of the HSE Child Protection Services, the Mannings discovered that a completely false and vexatious referral had apparently been made to the HSE Child Protection Services by local Garda concerning the January the 6th incident. What was the January 6th incident? Give us a bit of background to this.
This is relating, believe it or not, to Achill Island and the local football club in Achill Island. Now, Achill Island was the second place in Ireland that the Dochertys sought to base themselves while they appealed for some justice in Scotland. There was some football-related dispute and a vexatious and entirely false allegation of wrongdoing wrongdoing in terms of the sexual crimes against children was made against a referee, and this false allegation received considerable support from the local Garda and the local social services, specifically Mary Malee.
Oh.
And this is, of course, a name that crops up also in the Docherty case.
Right, so we'll just move on here, because here's another document referring to this case, which also mentions Mary Malee, and it just says here, I'll just read what it says here. Mary Malee, the HSE Child Protection Officer, and this is now, Child Protection is now called Tulsa, who apparently exonerated George Collins without carrying out any investigation whatsoever or contacting any witnesses, is the same individual who subjected the Manning family to a robust investigation based on some of the anonymous lies posted on the internet by George and Paul Collins in 2010. In her role as lead investigator, Ms. Malee interviewed the Manning girls aged 8 and 10 at the time, as well as their 6-year-old Down syndrome brother. Without the parents being present, Ms. Malee tried to solicit damaging comments from the children about their father, but was unable to do so. The Manning parents were 100% exonerated of any suspicion or wrongdoing, and the case was closed. Mary Malee would surface again in January 2013 when she was appointed again to investigate Stephen Manning on charges reportedly lodged by the local Garda Chief Superintendent that Stephen had locked his children in the house unsupervised for 3 days. This vexatious referral arose out of an incident when Paul Collins, the criminal brother of George Collins, visited the Manning home incognito in January 2013, along with a Garda escort, and proceeded to intimidate and frighten the Manning girls. When Mr. Manning contacted the Chief Superintendent for an appointment to discuss matters, the vexatious referral was made to Tulsa, which is Child Protection Services. So there seems to be a fair amount of police-supported intimidation going on here, and supported indeed by Mary Malee.
And yes, and a huge amount of common ground with the Docherty case. What we have here is vexatious reports. We have the Child Protection Services being targeted onto certain individuals who are innocent, with other concerns being ignored. We have what would appear to be conspiracy between elements in the Garda and elements within Tulsa to target certain individuals. And we have a complete disregard for the rule of law. And at the centre of it all, we have Mary Malee.
Okay, indeed, and here we are, Mary Malee. This is what Brian Docherty had to say about her. And Ms. Malee repeatedly committed perjury against my family during our court hearing. She said a great many things which were completely untrue, from petty details to potentially destructive, shameful lies. The only reason why a social worker as ambitious as she would attack an innocent family so viciously and illegally is if she had been instructed to do so by someone very senior in the organisation. She had clearly been given carte blanche to achieve this in any way she could. Not only did Malee continuously lie, she was also wickedly deceitful in passing on information to the judge which Malee knew to be untrue and had assured us would not be given to the judge. So what more do you need to say?
We are also hearing, Mike, that elements in the Irish government are trying to pin everything. Now, clearly, what Brian's saying there is that Mary Malee will have been instructed to behave in this way. But there's elements in the Irish government that are trying to pin the whole Docherty situation on Mary Malee in order to exonerate themselves. So I would suggest that, as they say in Scotland, Mary Malee's coat might be on a sugary peg these days.
Okay, and so the next thing, you want people to start taking a bit of action and basically writing to various organisations.
Just before we get to that,
okay.
the reason it prompted this is what we have is a letter that came in to the Dochertys from TUSLA, the Child Protection Agency. It refers to a recent court hearing that the Dochertys didn't know was happening. District Court Judge Alan Mitchell, that's another name that crops up in those documents we've just been seeing from Integrity Ireland, directed the Child and Family Agency, TUSLA, to write to the Dochertys outlining the conditions you're required to satisfy for reunification to be considered. So in order for TUSLA even to consider reuniting the Dochertys with their children, and bearing in mind there are no allegations whatsoever of any sort against this family, this is what TUSLA are looking for: a complete psychiatric assessment, a complete psychological assessment, attending a meeting with social worker Sinead Deeney and team leader Elise Crawford Quayle, agree a plan of supervision for access going forward with the CFA, so supervised access, provide the CFA with details of where you are living and supply current contact details, agree to a family welfare conference taking place, agree to a parenting capacity assessment. So all of these requirements only for TUSLA to then consider whether or not the Dochertys' children might be returned to them. So that I think is dreadful, and as a result, if we could have the last slide back on now.
Right.
If we could have the last slide back on. As a result, I'm suggesting I would like as many people as possible to write to the court. Now, there's two email addresses here for the court office and essentially the clerk, Mr. Val Cronin, and there's a letter, a postal address as well. And the main points I'd like people to get across is that TUSLA has no lawful excuse for violently seizing the Docherty children. So that's essentially kidnap, not child protection. That Brian and Janice Docherty have been assessed by a psychiatrist, and he said they had resilient and dynamic mental health. TUSLA has absolutely no grounds for suggesting otherwise. There is no allegation that these people are less than that they're entirely competent. The Guardian ad litem, Patricia Maloney, stated that, quote, "From my own perspective, as a children's guardian at Lytton, I can assure you that I believe and have informed the court that you have 4 wonderful children whose presentation and abilities, sensitivity and care for one another is a testament to you both and to the love in which you have provided to each of them." So how can that equate to a parenting assessment? There is no reason to have a parenting assessment.
Yeah.
And in conclusion, the continued assault on this family can't be justified and must end forthwith, and the children returned to them without either delay or conditions.
Okay, so hopefully we will get some momentum on that fairly quickly, get some emails, and actually we would probably prefer post if possible, David, because that tends to have quite a bit more weight.
Yes, post would be ideal. Make sure all the letters are polite and reasonably respectful but forceful, and make the point that there is clear unlawful behaviour by TUSLA, and it's the duty of the court to see that justice is done.
Okay, so we'd like to highlight this interview you gave on Open Your Mind Radio.
Yes, it was an excellent interview. It was quite short notice. I was delighted to be on with the gentleman at OYM Radio. They cover a lot of issues and have been for many years. So I would suggest that people have a look at that and listen to that. The bit on the Docherty family kicks off about 26 minutes in. It's a tape of about 2 hours, but there's about an hour and a half of that covers the Docherty case in the middle. And hopefully it will give people a little more insight into what's been going on. And I would like to thank very much the people at OYM Radio for highlighting this case.
Okay, so if you just put that back up again, the address is oymradio.com, and you can find the show archives from there, and look for David Scott. And what day was that, David? The 28th of August?
It's Sunday, yeah.
Sunday. Yeah, okay. Okay, let's move on to a related story then. Shaun Ritchie, and his clothes have been found apparently, but nobody knows where he is.
Yes, many thanks to the member of the Docherty team that spotted this. I think I'd heard it at the time. This happened in 2014, but it didn't mean much to me back then. And what happened was this young man disappeared. He was 21 years of age. He disappeared on Halloween 2014. Now, 2014 was the year that the Dochertys had to flee to Ireland in September. So less than 2 months later, this happened, and it happened only 6 miles from where the Dochertys were living, so it's very much the same part of the world. He disappeared from a Halloween party in questionable circumstances. People were running, people seemed to be frightened. There wasn't any clear explanation as to what that meant. There was a huge police search of the immediately surrounding area, looking in drainage ditches and bogland and this sort of thing for someone who might have stumbled and got lost. Nothing was found of him, but his clothes, or most of his clothes, were in fact found. So explanations that he might have wandered off looking for shelter do seem strange if he left his clothing behind. It's very, very concerning. His father, as you see here, is convinced that his son is dead and he'll never see them again, and I think that's the general view within the family as far as we can tell from what's in the press.
Yeah, can we just put that one up, please, Theo? Go ahead, David.
Recent events have been quite strange because the police have actually charged someone, and the person they've charged is this young man's mother, and they've charged her with wasting police time. So after 2 years of her son disappearing, she's not letting the matter drop, as you wouldn't as a mother, and she's just been charged with wasting police time. The allegation is that some of Shaun's friends received a text message, anonymous text message, to say that the texter had information and confirming that Shaun had been murdered. The police are saying that those text messages actually originated with Shaun's mother and have charged her with wasting police time. A quite extraordinary decision for Police Scotland to take with a grieving mother under these circumstances. I'm quite astounded by it. Now, just to illustrate how close this is to Crimmingate, where the Dochertys lived, here's a map. That is 6 miles. The left-hand circle is the search area that the police initiated when Shaun Ritchie disappeared, and that was the centre of that is where the party was that he disappeared from. And the right-hand circle is the Crimmingate estate where the Dochertys lived and were approached by a paedophile offering them £25,000 for access to their son. Now, there are other links between these two cases I've just discovered having sent this information to the Dochertys, but I'd like to leave that a week or two, and we're trying to get in touch with with Shaun Ritchie's family and let them know what we know first, rather than put it out into the public, as it might be somewhat of a shock to them.
Okay, so we will keep people posted on this case as well. Okay, let's move on then to other issues. Israel's role in Syria, David. This is becoming increasingly clear. Yes,
it is. We are seeing continual encouragement of certain terrorist groups by Israel. We're seeing wounded fighters in quite large numbers treated in northern Israeli hospitals. But it seems to be more than humanitarian aid. It seems to be general aid and association. And the view here is that Israel very much sees the Assad regime and a united Syria as a threat, as an alternative power base, and is seeking to disrupt that country, divided into three cantons, one being Kurdish, one being Sunni, one being Shia, so that it can form no competing power base to Israel. And that seems to be the political moves that are afoot. So, as we've discussed many times before, Western governments, our own and the United States and France foremost amongst them, have got a lot of questions to answer and a lot of involvement in destabilizing this regime, because what we're facing here is not a civil war, but rather externally motivated and funded terrorists seeking to destabilize a country. But we're also seeing that part of that is also the role of Israel in this.
Absolutely, and we must bring the Independent in here because, of course, they're promoting this. And the first paragraph of this article, first of all, the Independent calls it a civil war in the headline, and Assad regime accuses Israel of being Al-Qaeda's air force, but that's the headline. Then the first paragraph, it begins: Putin is the big Satan, Assad is the little Satan, Israel is now a friend, they help us. And that was a declaration made by Allah, who is clearly identified in the article as being a terrorist, or at least, well, perhaps the Independent doesn't go as far as to call him a terrorist, but certainly an opposition fighter. So let's call him a terrorist because that's what he is.
Yes, indeed. So we're seeing the terrorists themselves are quite clear who their friends are, and one of them is the State of Israel. Now, you'll appreciate that it's been long as Israeli policy to build a buffer zone around their country, a buffer zone of controlled and vassal states and subdivided states, so that they have a defensible perimeter. And this again seems to be an extension of that policy. But of course, it's the people of Syria who are bleeding and dying because of it.
Okay, well, just before we leave Israel then, you wanted to highlight this article from Haaretz, Israel police chief, and his comment being, it's natural for officers to be more suspicious of Ethiopians.
Yes, it's worth just noting that people view Israel as some sort of monolithic country. It's anything but. People looking from outside might think it's one group. In fact, it's an extraordinarily internally divided country. To a degree that coming from Britain is very, very surprising. As you will remember, the airlift from Ethiopia during the famine moved the black Jewish tribe from there and brought them to Israel. These people are suffering very considerably from prejudice against them because of their ethnic origin within Israel. So it's just worth noting that these divisions exist and these problems exist the world over, including in the State of Israel. Okay.
Moving on then to financial news. The Department of Work and Pensions today decided it would be great to tweet out this little graphic here. 5 things you should be doing now to save for retirement, and it linked to a nice little blog post that they had produced. And I thought we'd have a brief look, because we're running out of time, of the 5 things that we should all be doing to save for retirement. So here's number 1. Think about when you're planning to retire. Now, of course, when we're planning to retire bears no relationship to when we're actually going to retire. But they say here, reaching state pension age means you can claim the state pension. Don't worry about the fact that they don't say this, but don't worry about the fact that there's a £5 trillion black hole there. But you can claim the state pension anyway. You may not get it. Number 2, then, plan for the lifestyle that you want in retirement. Well, there ain't going to be any money, so you're not going to get much of a lifestyle. But let's go on. Number 3, stay enrolled in your workplace pension. Well, we know from BHS and the total decimation, well, in fact, the removal completely of any final salary pension schemes, that really workplace pensions aren't worth the paper they're written on anymore. but stay enrolled anyway. Number 4, track down your lost pensions. So the average person, they say, will have 11 jobs during their working life. So it's pretty easy to track past pension schemes, so they help to track those down. And finally, decide what to do with your pension savings. Well, there's a very simple response to this, David, and that is what pension savings? Because here's the Independent today, highlighting the fact that UK pension deficits have gone up by £100 billion in a single month last month. So pension deficits at UK firms spiraled by £100 billion over the last month as new record low interest rates dragged down expected returns on investments. Pension funds now own assets worth £710 billion less than the amount that they have to pay out to workers on retirement. So what this is saying quite clearly is, I've been highlighting the £5 trillion black hole in obligations for the state and public pension schemes run by the government, and what they're saying is there's now a £710 billion shortfall in private pensions, and this is according to PricewaterhouseCoopers. I don't know exactly what age you are, David, but I'm heading towards my late 40s, so I don't think I'm going to get to retire.
Well, I'm slightly older than you, I will confess, Mike, and I'm absolutely convinced that I will never get to retire. I think realistically, probably 12 months of ill health in the last year of your life, you might be able to take it a little bit easy. Apart from that, we're going to have to work. Right? There is not going to be the retirement that the previous generation knew because of zero interest rate policy, because of the black hole, because of the entirely fraudulent nature of the entire financial system. It will not be there. So our advice is quite different. Don't plan on any of these paper assets actually delivering. Plan on being able to keep on living and keep on working for the whole of your life, because any leisure time you get at the end after that will be a bonus. Indeed.
Okay, thank you very much for that. We're going to leave it there. Thanks, David, for joining us. Any final comments just before we go?
I would only suggest that people keep an eye on the Docherty files over the weekend. We'll be having the matter we talked about last week, which is who framed Sam Buchan. We'll be having that article put up, and we do have an answer to that. We're just waiting on confirmation, but we do have an answer to the question, who framed Sam Buchan. And we'll also have a video interview with the Dochertys themselves going up there. So some point over the weekend that should be available, and I would encourage people to keep an eye on that. There'll be lots of information there and in weeks to come.
Okay, now just before we leave for the day and for the weekend, the British Constitution Group has announced their autumn conference, which is going to be the 19th of November in Winchester, just after, if you're on the live stream on the UK Column website or on YouTube, just after this programme, we'll be playing out a short promotional video for that. Please watch and do get along if you possibly can. And no doubt we'll be hearing from Justin Walker on this programme probably next week at some point. Thanks for joining us. We will be back as usual on Monday at 1 p.m. Have a good weekend. Bye-bye.